Welcome once again to this edition of the Golden Rule. It's based on a verse in the Bible where Jesus said, "Do unto others the way you want them to do unto you." You know, this program is not intended to be entertainment. It's not an infomercial. Actually, it's a call to action, and I'm going to call my audience to action today. Now, I know that some watching this program are Christians and some are not. So it obviously won't apply to the non-Christians, but at least you'll be aware of what's going to be happening. So that's good. I want to start out by asking you all to read with me the verse on your screen. It's called the Prayer of Jabez, and here's how it goes. Are you ready to read? 1, 2, 3. Oh, that you would bless me indeed and enlarge my territory, that your hand would be with me, and that you would keep me from evil, that I may not cause pain. So God granted him what he requested. That's one verse out of the Bible. You know, this is not a book, it's a library containing 66 books. And those 66 books are broken into 1,189 chapters, and the total number of verses in that book are 31,103 verses. And the verse we just read is only one of those 31,000 verses. And it's a seemingly insignificant verse in that it appears in the book of 1 Chronicles, chapter 4, verse 10. And the first 9 chapters of 1 Chronicles read like a telephone book. It's nothing but a list of names. No commentary, no ad-lib, no description of the people, just a plain reading of their names. Hard to read names, strange names to our ears. 9 chapters of names, except when you get to 1 Chronicles chapter 4, verses 9 and 10, where you find the prayer of Jabez. You know, God's got a help wanted ad. He told his disciples, he says, "Lift up your eyes and look on the fields, for they are white unto harvest. Pray therefore to the Lord of the harvest that he would send forth laborers into his harvest field." So Christians, are you praying that prayer? Are you praying that God would send laborers into the white harvest fields? Because they are white. They're still white today. They're white 2,000 years ago, and they're whiter today. There are people who are desperate today. They're looking for answers, and they don't know where to look. They don't know that you find the answers in the Bible. So God's Help Wanted ad has no age limit, no income limit, no educational limit, no health limits, no excuses. Nobody that's a Christian can excuse himself from God's call on their life. But there are those who tried. In the Bible, there's a man named Moses. You've heard of Moses, I'm sure. He spent 40 years in Egypt as a child to Pharaoh's daughter. 40 years. He had a ruling role in the Egypt government. And then he had an incident which caused him to run from Egypt. And then he spent the next 40 years in the wilderness tending sheep. No responsibilities, no job description of any kind except just tending sheep. So now he's 80 years old. And at age 80, God speaks to him and says, "I've got an assignment for you." He spoke to him out of a burning bush, which was not being consumed. It was on fire, but it wasn't being consumed. And then he heard the voice of God saying, "Moses, I've got a job for you. I want you to go to Egypt and tell Pharaoh to let my people free." And you know what Moses said? "Who am I? You got the wrong guy. I have nothing going for me. I have no influence. I have no skills. I have no assets. I have nothing, God. You got the wrong man." 2 other men, you might have heard of them, King David and his son King Solomon. Both said the same thing when God told them the specific thing he wanted them to do. They said, "Who am I?" That's not an excuse. When God taps you on the shoulder and says, I've got a job for you, you become the person that he wants you to be, because it's not about you, it's not about your abilities. There was another group of guys, King Saul made an excuse. He says, I'm the least in my father's house. I have no qualifications. I have no connections. Gideon said the same thing. I'm the least in my family. I'm a nobody. And Jeremiah said, I'm just a child. Excuses, excuses, excuses. And people are still using excuses today. But I'm going to put a challenge forward to you for which you would have no excuse. There's no excuse why you cannot do what I'm going to ask you to do. Isaiah overheard a conversation in heaven where God was saying, I got a job that I needs done. Who can I send? He's asking, who can I send? And Isaiah overheard the conversation and he said, here am I, send me. And God did. He sent Isaiah. So there's no educational limits. You know, you can say, well, I'm just a dummy. I don't know anything about anything. Well, here's a story about a couple of dummies in the Bible. They're named Peter and John. They were followers of Jesus Christ, two of his disciples. And these guys had the opportunity to heal a man who'd been lame since birth. He was 41 years old. 41 years old when he got healed. And so the religious leaders came and challenged these guys and said, who do you think you are? What are you doing? What name did you use to do this? They know there's something about a name. And they said, it's the name of Jesus. He's the one who did it. We didn't do it. We just called on his name, and it's his power that made this man whole. And they said, well, don't talk about him anymore. They said, well, sorry about that. We can't help but declare the things which we have seen and heard. And the Jewish leaders observed, when they saw the boldness of Peter and John and perceived that they were unlearned and ignorant men, they marveled. They took knowledge of them that they'd been with Jesus. So it's not about your educational abilities. Here's another description of the people that God calls. It's in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 26 to 28. You see your calling, brethren, how that not many wise men after the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble are called, but God has chosen the foolish things of the world to confound the wise, and base things of the world and things which are despised hath God chosen. So, you don't have an excuse. We don't have an excuse. None of us has an excuse and says, I can't do what God wants me to do. That's a non-issue. There are no health limits. Doesn't matter what your physical condition is. There's a 65-year-old lady, invalid lady, bedridden, who prayed. She says, God, I feel so useless. Here I am in bed. I want to impact people for you. I can't even get out of bed. And the Lord spoke to her and said, what's that on your bedstand? And she says, it's a telephone. And what's that next to it? It's a telephone book. Start with the A's, God said. Cold turkey, make phone calls and tell them about me, and I will put the words in your mouth. She did it, and over the course of a year, she caused 200 people that had never heard of Jesus to give their lives to him and commit to a bedridden woman. There's a guy named Nick Vujicic. He was born with no arms and no legs. He's an international evangelist. There's another guy named David Ring who had multiple sclerosis. He couldn't talk any more than just like this. And he spoke to people all over the nation. And there's a guy that walked in, he's on the tarmac of the airport. He walked into a spinning propeller, lay on the ground for 45 minutes in freezing temperatures before an ambulance got there. He was left with 1 pint of blood in his body should have been dead, but he didn't die. Took him to the hospital, treated him, and he was in the recovery process. And as he's laying there, having been just brutalized by a propeller on an airplane, one of his nurses made a comment about how she didn't feel very good. And he says, "Come over to my bed where I can just lay my hands on you." And he prayed for her. Prayed for her. There's no limits about physical excuses. No excuses. And there's no age limits either. Josiah was chosen king of Israel when he was 8 years old. Benjamin Franklin went to London as a spokesman for the United States when he was 14 years old. And I have a picture on my desk of an evangelist who at age 113, being blind, had speaking engagements booked for 2 years in advance. There are no limitations, no disqualifiers. You know, God doesn't make any junk. There's a lot of people who have a very poor self-image, very poor. They think they amount to nothing, but I'm going to tell you something. It doesn't matter what your track record has been either. It is never too late for you to serve God and to pick up your cross and to follow Him. Today is the first day of the rest of your life. Now, I'm going to put the verse up again, and I'm going to ask you one more time to read it with me out loud. You ready? "Oh, that you would bless me indeed and enlarge my territory, that your hand would be with me, and that you would keep me from evil, that I may not cause pain." So God granted him what he requested. Here's the challenge. Here's the assignment. Anybody can do this. Read this verse to yourself out loud at least once a day for 30 days. It takes 15 seconds. 15 seconds. That's it. And you say, well, what good will that do? Well, I'm going to, in the next program, tell you what good it did a man named Jabez. But I'm going to tell you at the same time, as you start reciting this prayer, praying it, it'll become a prayer. First, you're just going to figure, what's this thing saying? And I can't remember the words. You'll remember the words. If you repeat it for 30 days, at least once a day, you will have it memorized by the end of the month. That's a guarantee. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. What's going to happen is you're going to start paying attention to what you're reading. And the first thing you're going to ask is, you're going to ask God to bless you indeed. Do you want God's blessing? Does that sound selfish? Oh, God, bless me. It's not selfish, because in order for you to bless others, you first have to be a walking manifestation of the fact that God has blessed your life. And then the next thing you do is you ask God to enlarge your territory. You want more influence. And there's some of you, I know there's some of you listening to this say, I don't want any influence. I don't care about any of that stuff. Oh, you do if you're a Christian, because Jesus said, go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. He's talking to every single believer when he said that. The third point is that your hand might be with me. It's not you that's going to do the works. It's God in you and through you. And the last thing is you're praying, God, keep me from evil. Keep me from evil. That's vitally important. So that's just a simple 4-point prayer. And I'm recruiting. I'm looking for 300 people specifically that will agree to do this. And I'm going to ask you to let me know that you're on board. Call my phone number. It's on the screen, 972-757-0078. All I want is your name. I don't want any information from you. I just want to know that you've agreed to be a part of Gideon's mighty army. 300 people. Can you do it? Will you do it? I hope so. I look forward to seeing you next week when we'll go into some details about how this thing played out in the life of the author of the book entitled The Prayer of Jabez. Thank you so much for watching today. Watch the program again. It repeats every 4 hours from Monday to Monday, Monday to Sunday, so you can watch it over and over and over and tell other people too. God bless you. Have a great week.